Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'm Mary Beth LeBate, State Budget Director, and the Governor has designated me to be chair of today's meeting, and I'd also like to introduce Bill Morrow, Secretary to the Governor. I'd like to take note that we have a few public observers, Doreen and Sarah, observing for Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan, Mark Wurzel, observing for City Council Minority Leader Stephen Mateo, and Jay Lifton, observing for Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb. They're here with us today. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last annual board meeting, which was held on July 29th, 2014. These minutes were previously distributed for comment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. Next item on the agenda is the financial plan for fiscal year 2016 through 2019. Mr. Mayor, I understand that you will present the city's four-year plan?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair LeBate. Thank you for the work you do on behalf of the people of New York State. And we appreciate the opportunity to work with you on a regular basis. I want to acknowledge and thank the members of this board for all they do for the city and for the state. Especially like to single out Comptroller Tom DiNapoli and Comptroller Scott Stringer, both of whom are crucial partners in all we do and who we are in constant touch with. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, of course, to Jeff Hallis, John Levin, and Lawrence Golub, and to the Executive Director, Jeffrey Summer, for the work that you do as part of this body. I want to give you today a broad accounting of the City of New York's financial health, which I'm glad to say is very strong. Since I last appeared before you, my administration has deepened its commitment to a progressive, honest, and responsible stewardship of the city's finances, rolling out a full slate of investments to create a stronger and more resilient and more equitable city, while taking what we think are truly innovative measures to protect our long-term fiscal health. I say this not as a slogan, I say this as a literal fact. Fiscal prudence underpins every decision we make. It's the foundation of our fiscal 16 budget, developed and adopted in true partnership with the New York City Council, which worked with us in an atmosphere of openness and transparency, and I'm proud to say we delivered not only a strong budget, but an on-time, in fact, an early budget. I want to thank the members of my team who played such a crucial role in this process. Our first Deputy Mayor, Tony Shorus, my Budget Director, Dean Fullahan, and our Commissioner for the Office of Labor Relations, Bob Lynn, all of whom did, I think, an exemplary job. The fiscal 16 budget reflects our values and vision for the city, as well as the complex and critical moment in which we find ourselves. There are many indicators, and by the way, I should hasten to add, what I'm saying here mirrors a lot of what I said at the preliminary budget presentation and at our executive budget presentation earlier in the year. There are many indicators that show how the city's economy at large has recovered from the Great Recession, yet a tremendous number of people in this city have not recovered. The number I've used many times still holds true. Nearly 46% of all New Yorkers are living at or near the poverty level. More than 500,000 New Yorkers are either unemployed, working part-time while searching for full-time work, or looking for work and not finding it at all. And the cost of living continues to strain our families. In 2014, over half of renters in New York City were rent burdened, meaning they spent more than 30% of their income on housing. This has all come together into an unprecedented situation during this recovery, and I think it's fair to say in the cases that I'm talking about, so-called recovery, poverty continues to grow. There were 186,000 more New Yorkers below the federal poverty level in 2013 than there were in 2009. So literally during the time frame that we believe this recovery to be happening in, a huge number of people have slipped into poverty, which is the reverse of what we saw in previous recoveries. The inequality I'm describing inhibits a thriving and prosperous future for the city, not simply for the people who make up the city, but for the city as a whole. So you'll see in our budget fact that we're using every power and deploying every tool, making every investment we think prudent to address these issues, while always remaining attuned to the need to be fiscally responsible and paying close attention to shifts in the economic climate. In that vein, we are extremely attentive to signs of concern on the horizon. One crucial example, U.S. GDP growth of 2.1% in the context of this recovery makes it the second lowest of the 12 recoveries since World War II. So we think that is one of many troublesome statistics that suggest we must brace ourselves for a downturn. No one can predict what's to come, and it is that very uncertainty against which we are fortifying ourselves. We've taken extraordinary steps to cut costs, to build up our reserves, to reduce our risks, and to make realistic forecasts. When this administration took office, we immediately began to remedy perhaps the most urgent fiscal situation we faced, which is the fact that we had literally none of our workforce under contract. We quickly and respectfully, working closely with those who represent our employees, changed that situation. We have now come to terms with over 80% of our workforce and the unions that represent them. By securing both civilian and uniform labor patterns, we purged a great deal of uncertainty from the city's budget, and this has protected all New Yorkers, allowing us a powerful measure of control in an otherwise uncertain economic landscape. These responsible labor settlements, developed in partnership with our employees, provide fair raises to the men and women who keep the city running, and they've enabled us to set unprecedented health care savings goals, fundamentally bending the health care cost curve for the city. These are not pie-in-the-sky targets, as our most recently quarterly healthcare savings report indicates. Labor settlements have already resulted in a $400 million reduction in healthcare costs for fiscal 15. I'm proud to say we are on track to meet our next goal of $700 million saved in fiscal 16, and we are confident we will ultimately achieve our commitment of $3.4 billion saved in total through fiscal 19. These savings factor into a truly honest budgeting process. It takes a frank and cautious approach to revenue and expense forecast and drives us to continually reduce our already manageable out-year gaps, ensuring that they're realistic, and it helps us to clock in at a much lower than the historical average level. We are also taking complementary and unprecedented action to build up the necessary resources to contend with a downturn. First, by raising the general reserve, the city's precautionary savings for expenses, to $1 billion annually, and that is true throughout the life of our financial plan over these next years. Second, by raising the Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund to $3.3 billion. Third, by creating the first ever capital stabilization reserve of $500 million, protecting our ability to keep the infrastructure of the city in good repair and allowing us to lay the foundation for growth. We've made tremendous strides towards creating a more efficient government that performs at the highest level while providing real savings to our budget. In addition to the healthcare savings already discussed, agency savings will reduce expenses by $530 million in fiscal 15 and 16. When factoring in an additional $400 million in debt savings, we stand to save nearly $1 billion in those 2 years. And we continue to work with our agencies on a savings plan that boosts reserves further and keeps our future budgets in balance. All of these measures have led the rating agencies to affirm our strong, stable ratings from last year and to cite our prudent management of the city's finances. Now, these efforts to strengthen the city's economic position are deeply connected to the work we do every day to build a New York that is stronger and more resilient and fairer for everyone. Our budget reflects this through targeted investments as outlined in our blueprint for the future of the city, 1NYC. We followed through on commitments from last year, for example, investing approximately $295 million in fiscal 15 and $443 million in fiscal 16 to make sure that more than 70,000 4-year-olds can expect full-day, high-quality pre-K beginning next month. Second, we're investing $618 million in fiscal 15 we've invested in fiscal 15 $618 million to finance over 20,300 affordable apartments, placing us squarely on track to meet our goal of 200,000 affordable apartments by 2025. We're also making a host of new investments, $165 million in fiscal 16 to transform our underperforming schools into places where parents, teachers, and community all bring resources to bear to change the lives of our children. $170 million in investments in fiscal 16 to give the NYPD the tools and strategies it needs to be safe, to draw closer to the communities it serves, and to continue to maintain the city's historically low crime levels. And significant capital investments to urgently combat climate change and mitigate its effects by reducing the city's carbon footprint by 80% by the year 2050. That includes more than $1 billion in capital investments to retrofit all public buildings in the next 10 years, which will also ultimately yield major cost savings on the expense side. In conclusion, we all know by law New York City must balance its budget each year, and we've done that. But in a larger sense, too, this is a budget predicated on the notion of balance. We know and we're demonstrating that progressive change and financial prudence can and must go hand in hand. This has driven a budget of bold ideas and commitments, made with a clear-eyed assessment of the possible and the prudent. It reflects the sacred trust that is always placed in those who are honored with leadership of this city. It's our obligation to set a course and chart a route forward that will lift up each of the more than 8.4 million people who live here, while always preparing for whatever economic winds may blow our way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Controller DiNapoli, do you have any comments on the city's financial plan?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman LeBate, and thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for your report to the board. I'm joined by Deputy Controller from New York City, Ken Bleiweiss. Ken and his team prepared the State Controller's report on the city's financial plan that was released today. I'd like to offer the following comments for the record. 4 years ago, New York City was in the early stages of its recovery from the Great Recession. At that time, the city was projecting a budget gap of $4.9 billion for fiscal year 2015 and was drawing down its reserves. In addition, nearly all of the city's labor agreements had expired. Much has changed since then. Over the past year, the city has reached new labor agreements with 80% of its workforce and is working cooperatively with its unions to hold down the growth in health insurance costs. These agreements provide cost certainty through 2018. The city's economy added a record 120,000 jobs during calendar year 2014 and is on track to add more than 100,000 jobs during 2015. Since 2009, the city has added more than 500,000 jobs, 4 times as many as were lost during the recession. Many of these jobs are concentrated in lower wage employment sectors, but business services, tech, and Wall Street are also adding jobs at this time. The unemployment rate has fallen to 6.1%, the lowest level in nearly 7 years, although still higher than the pre-recession level. Last year, tax collections reached a record $51.7 billion, 33% higher than the pre-recession peak. In fact, collections were $3.1 billion higher than the city's forecast at the beginning of the year. Even after contributing $955 million to the Retirees Health Benefit Trust, the city was still left with a $3.6 billion surplus in 2015. The surplus was used by the city to increase its reserves and to help balance the 2016 budget. Over the years, the city's conservative approach to forecasting tax revenues has served it well, helping to close projected budget gaps and cushioning the impact of adverse developments. The current 4-year financial plan continues this practice. For fiscal year 2016, the city forecasts only a small increase in tax revenues, even though the economy continues to grow at a steady pace. While tax collections are likely to be higher than projected by the city under current economic conditions, there is the possibility of an economic setback during the financial plan period. The city has experienced 5 years of job growth, and the city's financial plan assumes uninterrupted job growth for another 5 years. That would be the longest job expansion in 60 years. While the economy shows no signs of weakening, changes in the business cycle are inevitable. External events such as international developments and changes in federal monetary policy could impact the city's economy. The city has prudently increased its reserves to hedge against a budgetary setback. It has increased the general reserve to $1 billion, 10 times more than the statutory minimum and the largest amount ever. It has also set aside $500 million in a newly created capital stabilization reserve. In addition, the city added $1.8 billion to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust during the past 2 years. The trust was established to help fund post-employment benefits other than pensions, though the trust has been used in the past as a rainy day fund. The city's contributions raised the balance in the trust to $3.3 billion, the largest amount ever. This is a very significant development, though it has to be considered in the context that the unfunded OPEB liability totals $89.5 billion. As we've heard from the mayor, the city has made targeted investments in education, public safety, and other programs. These investments increased agency spending by nearly $1.6 billion annually. The city has also outlined an ambitious 10-year capital strategy totaling $83.8 billion through 2025. Debt service would reach $7.5 billion by 2019 and would account for 13.4% of tax revenue in that year. Even with new labor agreements and higher agency and capital spending, the city projects smaller budget gaps for fiscal years 2017 and 2018 than were anticipated 1 year ago. The city projects budget gaps of $1.5 billion in 2017, $1.9 billion in 2018, and a gap of $2.9 billion in 2019. As I mentioned earlier, the budgets for these years include a general reserve of $1 billion. If unneeded, the reserve could be used to help close the projected budget gaps. While these gaps are relatively small, ranging from 2.5% to 4.5% of city fund revenue, the city should continue to narrow those gaps. Scrutinizing agency operations for savings should be part of that effort. Last year, the city resumed that process after a 2-year hiatus. In a separate effort, the city has outlined a plan to reduce overtime costs in the uniformed agencies, which reached a record $1.5 billion in 2015. While the city's financial outlook continues to improve, the Health and Hospitals Corporation and the New York City Housing Authority still face significant challenges, which have required greater assistance from the city. In conclusion, New York City's budget for fiscal year 2016 is balanced, and the out-year budget gaps are manageable. The city's credit rating is high, and the demand for city securities is strong. The city is better prepared today to deal with an adverse budgetary development than it was 1 year ago. But there is still more work to do. I'd certainly like to commend Mayor de Blasio, City Controller Stringer, the City Council, and their respective staffs for their very diligent efforts and always their cooperation in working with my office and my staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Controller Napoli. City Controller Stringer, any comments?
Yes, well, first, I just want to introduce Elena Gilligo, our first Deputy Controller, and Tim Mulligan, our Deputy Controller for Budget. And it's a pleasure to join Mayor de Blasio and Controller DiNapoli, Budget Director LeBate, Secretary Bill Morrow, and the members and staff of the Financial Control Board. The mission and responsibilities of this board are as important today as they were following New York City's brush with bankruptcy in 1975. And the rigorous scrutiny of the city's budget and financial plan is one of my office's most serious and critical responsibilities. And we are now continuing 37 consecutive years of balanced budgets in our city. And I want to commend Bill de Blasio, Mayor de Blasio, for his leadership and his tenacity in getting this right. So I want to begin with a review of our FY15 performance and look forward to telling you that we have some very good news. Since our FY 2015 budget was adopted last year, the city has identified $5.5 billion in additional resources in FY 2015. Over half of that was generated by robust tax revenues, which came in $3 billion above forecast. In fact, tax revenues last year were 7% higher than the previous year. And the city spent less than 1/5 of these additional resources, saving more than $4 billion for the future, nearly $3.6 billion in the form of a prepayment in FY 2016. Those funds were more than enough to eliminate the FY16 gap. Additionally, the city budget identified $2.4 billion in new resources for FY 2016. These resources funded additional expenditures, increased the general reserve, and established the capital stabilization reserve. My office projects that even higher revenues in FY 2016 will more than offset additional risks. These include higher uniform overtime costs, as well as lower Medicaid claims by DOE for special education services. At the end of the day, projected revenues will reduce our cumulative out-of-year gaps to more than $1.8 billion. This would be the lowest level in 20 years. That's why the mayor is smiling, right? But good years cannot breed complacency. Our economy faces potential instabilities from abroad, from Greece to China. There is uncertainty over federal monetary policy as well as fiscal risk with the nation's debt limit and budget policy. New York City knows better than most that our economy could be at risk from terrorism or natural disasters. Now, of course, the best protection against downturns is to accumulate resources and build a financial cushion. But the question is, how much is enough? Today, as part of this exercise, my office is releasing a report showing, for the first time, the details of New York's prudent accumulation and use of prior year resources in the last two economic cycles. The purpose is to define the appropriate level of a financial cushion needed for New York City to weather the next downturn. And the findings are sobering. In the aftermath of the last two recessions, New York needed over $8 billion of prior year assets and reserves to maintain budget balance. Thankfully, we have turned the corner, and I do congratulate this mayor. Our tax revenues are 33% higher than they were before the financial crisis. We have over 400,000 more jobs than before the Great Recession. We've reversed 6 years of annual operating deficits in our budget and will end FY 2015 with our first operating surplus since 2008. But our financial cushion remains well below its level at the beginning of FY 2009. I have urged and worked with the administration to increase the cushion. And again, I commend the mayor for doing just this. He declined to draw down $1 billion from the OPEB trust in FY 2014 and has since added more than $1.8 billion to that trust. He's increased the general reserve to its highest level ever and established a new capital reserve. Our analysis shows, though, that based on two prior recessions and the guidelines of rating agencies, the city needs a cushion in the range of 12 to 18% of its adjusted operating budget, with 15% the norm at midpoint. Currently, we're not even at the bottom end of that range. So as FY 2016 begins, we're $1.2 billion short of 12%, and that must change, and I think it can. As the years of stable growth continue, we should be able to reach 18%, or the equivalent of an additional $6 billion. Now, again, it's a pleasure to come here and work with the FCB. By working together with the state and Mayor de Blasio, I know that we will protect the integrity of New York's budget process and ensure our city's fiscal future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. I'd like to call on our Acting Executive Director, Jeff Summers, to present the staff's comments.
Thank you. This September will mark the 40th anniversary of the Financial Emergency Act and the creation of the board. The fiscal discipline required by the Act and the continued adherence by the city over these years has proven to be instrumental during both good and bad economic times. The city has adopted a balanced budget for fiscal 2016, mainly due to strong fiscal management in fiscal 2015. City-funded tax revenues, mainly from the personal income tax and real estate transfer taxes, increased by $3.2 billion over the city's estimates in 2015. In addition, the city recognized $1.5 billion in expenditure savings, mainly from the takedown of reserves and lower debt service costs. This allowed the city to add $955 million to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust and prepay fiscal year 2016 expenses by almost $3.6 billion. With the support of the fiscal 2015 surplus, the 2016 operating budget increases by $1.5 billion. The added spending continues the mayor's priorities in the Department of Education and increases support for the Health and Hospitals Corporation and Housing Authority. The City Council at adoption added $335 million across several agencies and programs. The city also at adoption decided to add significant resources to the police department. The added funding will allow the hiring of almost 1,300 new police officers by July 1st, 2016. To offset the cost of the new hires, the city has for the first time placed a cap on city-funded police overtime. We will be monitoring the success of this program. It is an important first step. It should be noted that we still see significant risks for overtime in the fire and correction departments as the city adds personnel and implements reforms. Even with the incremental spending increases the city has maintained in 2016 and beyond, conservative revenue forecast and has increased the general reserve to an historic high of $1 billion in each year of the financial plan. The city has been cautious after 2 very strong years to not assume continuation of high growth in revenues. The city assumes a weakening in non-property taxes along with the downturn in miscellaneous and non-recurring revenues in 2016. Moderate growth returns in fiscal years 2017 to 19. We agree with the city's caution given the financial uncertainties overseas and the Federal Reserve's decision to start raising interest rates later this year. Based on current trends, however, we believe the non-property taxes and miscellaneous revenues are likely to be higher by as much as $500 million in fiscal 2016. From fiscal years 2016 to 19, the largest areas of expenditure growth are salary and wages due to the implementation of contract settlements, healthcare costs, and debt service. Healthcare costs are estimated to grow for active city workers by 19% over the financial plan. This would be even higher if the city had not achieved healthcare savings in the recent labor settlements. The annual pay-as-you-go retiree health benefit costs are expected to grow from $2.2 billion in 2016 to $2.7 billion in fiscal 19, an increase of 24%. Total funded debt service is expected to grow by 19.1% over the plan from $6.5 billion in 16 to $7.7 billion in 19. The growth in debt service reflects an expanding city-funded capital program as well as conservative borrowing assumptions. The city released a finalized 10-year capital strategy that comprises an expanded scope. The strategy contains $83.8 billion of capital commitments, which is over $30 billion larger than the last strategy. While the city projects that debt service as a percent of tax revenues will stay below the 15% level that is deemed affordable, over the 10-year period, revenues could be volatile. With that in mind, the city has created a capital stabilization reserve in fiscal 2016 totaling $500 million. This reserve is meant to cushion an increase in debt service burden that could be exacerbated by a reduction in tax revenues. With the increased spending and conservative revenue estimates, the out-year gaps are projected to be $1.5 billion in 2017, $1.9 billion in 18, and $2.9 billion in 19. These out-year gaps are manageable with the general reserve at $1 billion in each year. The city, however, needs to manage fiscal 2016 in a way that builds up a surplus so it can continue to decrease the out-year deficits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the private members if they have any comments.
On behalf of the 3 private members, Jeff Hallis next to me and Lawrence Gollop, who could not attend, I would like to comment on the city's fiscal condition. We agree with the statements made today by the staff and the state and city controllers that the city has presented a balanced budget for fiscal 2016 and a 4-year financial plan that has manageable out-year gaps and increased reserves. It is noteworthy, and we agree with the mayor's decision in fiscal 2015 to add $1 billion to the Retiree Health Care Benefits Trust. In addition, the 4-year plan continues to rely on conservative revenue forecasts, and the general reserve has been increased to $1 billion in each year. While agency spending has increased in fiscal 2015 and is planned to further increase in fiscal year 2016 and over the life of the financial plan, these costs were offset by higher revenue collections. In fiscal 2015, the surplus reached almost $3.6 billion, which was used to balance FY 2016. With all that said, we continue to be concerned about fiscal conditions not captured by the 4-year plan. As we have commented in the past, the city's required method of accounting allows for delay in funding for certain obligations, resulting in the creation of large unfunded liabilities. The unfunded liabilities for retiree health care benefits and the pension system continue to be large. As of June 30, 2014, the pension system was currently almost 73% funded, leaving $46.6 billion liability. The underfunding of the healthcare liability starts fiscal 2016 at $89.5 billion. Mr. Mayor, we agree with your decision to add money to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which now contains almost $3.3 billion. You have added money to the trust each of your 2 years in office. In addition, your agreement with Labor to achieve healthcare savings of $3.4 billion over the 4 years, with recurring savings of $1.3 billion thereafter, may help bring down the growth in the unfunded liability. Unfortunately, the net unfunded liability starts at about $89.5 billion, and if the liability continues to grow as it has in the past, the underfunding will increase despite your additions to the trust. We would urge you to continue to increase and lock in funding to the trust, not in an ad hoc way, but with regular payments. We are also hopeful that you will be able to achieve the recurring savings anticipated and continue discussions with Labor to increase those savings. Given the healthy fiscal condition of the city currently, we believe there is no better time to reduce the unfunded liabilities. If we do not, future generations may have to pay for a burden for promises we have made in the past and continue to make today. The annual cost for pensions and pay-as-you-go retiree health benefits will continue to grow. While not imminent, combined with an economic downturn, these costs could either crowd out other priorities, require large tax increases, or force the city to break promises made to its workforce. We have seen this happen already in other states and cities around the country that have not had the fiscal discipline and controls that New York City has. Mr. Mayor, we urge you and the city to continue on the path of fiscal discipline and develop plans to reduce unfunded liability and maintain the city's good fiscal health. And I think I'd like to say informally, all of us are very impressed by the steps you have taken.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Mayor de Blasio, the response to any of the comments?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick responses. First of all, thank you for the assessment, Mr. Levin, and to all the private members. I would say a moment of reflection first. Those of us who have worked together in public life a long time, Comptroller Stringer, Comptroller Napoli, Bill Mulrow, once upon a time ran for office himself. I think it is important to reflect in the year 2015 that the city is in such a profoundly different place than it was a few decades ago. And success has many fathers and mothers. Everyone around this table has been a part of that process and should be proud of it. I think what's most important and reflected, I think, in everyone's comments is we have not made the mistake, none of us have made the mistake, that some have made in the past in other governments of forgetting what the bad times looked like. This very body exists because of the history of the 1970s and is a constant reminder to us to be vigilant. And so I think where there's a tremendous unity among everyone is that we embrace that notion of vigilance. We don't take any of this lightly, and we're actually all, if you composite all the comments, everyone is looking in one form or another how to perfect that sensibility of vigilance and put it into real terms while still achieving what we must for our people. A couple of very quick specifics. I appreciate the acknowledgement about the reforms we made in terms of police overtime. I think it's absolutely right and fair to say that is a powerful idea that has to be proven to be effective in action. Part of how we intend to make that work is to make it very transparent, to set a clear number past which overtime cannot go, but for the most exceptional events, for example, Hurricane Sandy. And we think that process of having a clear public goal and making it a matter for all involved to focus on, to keep within that overtime limit, we think it will be successful. Commissioner Bratton has been particularly clear about his belief that that's the way to get things done and that we can attain that goal, particularly given the increases that we are making to the police force's strength levels. Second of all, the second reform that we put in place we're very proud of is we've gone much farther in civilianization than ever had been achieved before within the police department. We think that is a reform that was long overdue. And again, great cooperation from Commissioner Bratton and his team. We think those are two big structural changes that will have long-term positive fiscal impacts. A couple of very quick points. There was the mention on the overtime situation with the corrections department. That is an area of real concern for us. In the short term, given the many challenges at the correction department, which are well documented and which we are taking full responsibility for addressing, It will be hard to bring that number down. We are working intensely to increase the number of full-time officers and to better train and prepare them. And we think over time that will help us to reduce the overtime number. But I do want to be honest about the short term needing to keep that number high because we've got a lot of fixing of a lot of problems to do, particularly on Rikers Island. And finally, on the point related to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, again, I think there's a lot of consensus here about the importance of the actions that we've taken and the importance of staying vigilant. I would add that on the healthcare savings, we not only believe that we could expand upon that number going forward, we intend to, and that's something actually at the time of the first major labor deal last spring, we said the goal here is that this is a floor, not a ceiling. We want to take that $3.4 billion in savings, try and surpass it within the time frame we're in now, and then build upon it in the years thereafter. We believe there's more savings where that came from, and we believe that, in fact, labor and management learning together how to achieve those savings in the long-term interest of all will open the door to even higher levels. And so clearly hearing the point, Mr. Levin, about the potential for always looking for ways to deepen the trust, clearly I know we all agree it's the two-part equation. Wherever we can deepen the savings, we're achieving the same goal, and we're actually bullish on the possibility for deepening the savings over time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now call on Jeff Summer to report on the staff's recommendations concerning today's proposed resolution.
The determination that the board makes deals with reviewing 5 conditions that the original act had put in place to determine if any of those conditions have occurred and whether reimposition of a control period was required. Since 2008, the provision that called for an automatic control period expired, and what now exists is the board reviews the 5 conditions to determine whether there is any reason to request the state legislature to reimpose the control period. So I'd like to just run through the conditions briefly. The first condition is the city shall have incurred a deficit in excess of $100 million in the results of operation. The city has entered fiscal 2015 subject to the final audit with a surplus of almost $3.6 billion and has prepaid fiscal 2016 expenses. Number 2 is the city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on any of its notes or bonds when due and payable. 3 is the city shall have issued notes in violation of short-term borrowing restrictions set forth in Section 9B of the Act. And the 4th, which I'll read what the condition is and then explain it, is the controllers shall have jointly certified that they could not, on the basis of the facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. Briefly, that means the 2 controllers say there's sufficient market access for the city to sell its notes and bonds. The city has paid all principal and interest on its notes and bonds and has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the Act. I have also received letters from the state and city controllers informing me that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. The last condition is the city shall have violated any provisions of the Act, and such violation substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its bonds or notes when due and payable, or the city's ability to adopt or adhere to a balanced operating budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that as of August 4th, 2015, none of the events which would have required the imposition of a control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood and imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs.
Very good. Can I have a motion to approve the determination?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. I believe that is all of our business for today. Can I have a motion to adjourn?